Greetings, everyone. This is Mike Riley, the voice of Ironman. And this is the Old School Tri Show with my Kiwi mates Cameron Harper and Brian Ashby. The show that talks about all things triathlon, old and new. We're powered by Ansco Foods, bringing you nutrition and good health from New Zealand's beef and lamb. Thanks for listening, everyone. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome along to another edition of the Old School Tri Show, brought to you by our great friends at Ansco Foods. And today, Brian, there's so many people involved to bring an Ironman race to life, and today we're talking to somebody who had a huge effect on Ironman New Zealand.
Well, she certainly brought it to life, that's for real. She was also a two-time Ironman herself, long-time race director, event director, director of everything Ironman New Zealand, the great Jane Patterson.
Ansco Foods is proud to be the new naming partner of Ironman New Zealand, ensuring every stroke, pedal and stride is powered by the best nature has to offer. Ansco Foods is on a mission to bring nutrition and good health from New Zealand's finest beef and lamb. Ansco Foods, putting the iron in Ironman with New Zealand's finest beef and lamb. Visit anscofoods.com/Ironman to find out more.
Well, gosh, it's just about royalty we're dealing with today. Member of the New Zealand Order of Merit, no less. Former, we can call her CEO, we can call her boss, we can call her all sorts of things. We can also call her an Ironman because she's done it herself. Jane Patterson, awesome to have you on board with us. Welcome.
Oh, thanks. It's just great to be here. I'm excited.
Let's pull the clock sort of way back, and you were working, I think, for sort of IMG, but
Yep.
Prior to that, sports admin, and we'll sort of look at some of the other things you've done as well as Ironman. But how did you sort of get into sports management, sports administration, and the like, and just I guess work your evolution towards Ironman itself?
Yeah, sure. Well, I would say I kind of fell into it. I had done my degree at Canterbury and then had got into a role working in public relations in a couple of PR consultancies. One of the big consultancies I worked with was Bald & Boyle Group, and they had the Bank of New Zealand, or BNZ as it was known then, and Lion Breweries as their client, and I worked on that piece of business in their marketing areas, which predominantly was around sponsorship of events. So we worked on the cricket for the BNZ and the America's Cup and rugby for Steinlager, and I just I loved it, and I just got more and more interested in the event side of it. And so I worked in PR for about a decade, and then I decided to see if I could get into major events. So I paused my career in Wellington in PR, moved to Auckland, did some research, saw that IMG was the company, and I literally just picked up the phone, and they were recruiting a role at that time. I actually hadn't seen it. But Paul Gleeson was the person I spoke to on the phone. You might remember Paul, just an outstanding CEO and heavily supporter of Ironman in its very early days. And he said, look, the actually applications for that role closed yesterday, but look, what have you done? What's your background in major events? And I said, well, I haven't really got a background in major events, but in running them, but here's what I've been doing for the last sort of 8 to 10 years. And he said, look, why don't you come in and see us tomorrow? So I popped in and saw him, and 3 or 4 days later, he gave me the job, which I was like over the moon about. And that was how I started. I got into IMG, and we were working on a duathlon, an Ironman, the New Zealand Golf Open, a beach volleyball series. And actually also I was working on concerts in their arts division. I used to run the concert at the Mission Estate Vineyard and then head down to Queenstown. So did some touring with the Doobie Brothers, Beach Boys. Yeah, I mean, it was fun. It was a combination of the arts and sport, actually, while I was there. So that was 1998, because I remember the very first Ironman I went to was the last one in Auckland. Yeah. And there was a girl running it, fantastic at her job. I was an event coordinator, and then she was leaving. And I remember I went in, I was so blown away by what I'd seen at Auckland. I'd never been to an Ironman before. I didn't know a lot about it. I went to see Paul Gleason, and I said to him, could I have a go at being the event director for Ironman? And it was like, you've only been with us a minute, but yeah, I'll have a think about it. And he agreed to that and appointed me as the event director in 1999. So I did that move to Taupo, and I was literally learning on the job.
Wow.
But and that was my foray into it.
Often, do you have to reflect back to that conversation when you look at, we'll get into it later, but what you've achieved in your life, professional life, and also personal life, Jane? You give a heck of a lot to every role that you do. But do you ever reflect back to that pitch to Paul and that he actually took a punt on somebody that he had no idea who you were?
Yeah, I do, and I speak to it often. In fact, one of the things I love doing is going back to my old school. I've spoken there at their sort of end of school ceremony for the final year leavers. I don't want to even try to say what year that is. In my year, it was my life. It was seventh form, but anyway, for the school leavers, and do a speech, and I often speak about it because they're just moment in time, and I've always been very open that. I was an average student at school. I was I got 50s and 60s. I was very average. And I went off to university. I remember my school was a bit surprised I was going to university, but yeah, I thought, oh, well, I'll give it a crack. And I loved university, made some great friends there. But the biggest thing I got out of being at university was getting some confidence, I think. And so I reflect back on that conversation. And those are just moments. And dare I say it, he asked me what school I went to. And at that time, maybe, the school he went to played a role in his mind and that era that he was in. But I've always tried to grab those moments, and I did a lot of work to do that. And actually, I got my job in PR in the same way. I phoned every PR firm in Wellington when I finished university and offered to come and work for them for free for a couple of weeks. And two of them said, yeah, that'd be great. And I went in and did 2 weeks with one for free. And then I went down the road to another one and did 2 weeks. And then they extended it. And I ended up working for them for like 6 years.
Yeah. Wow.
So when I decided I wanted to get into major events, I thought, well, I'll do the same thing. But there weren't as many, companies as there were in PR in those days. So I had a crack at IMG. But that's always been my approach and remains my approach to looking for work, is actually to do some of the work yourself, to go out and get it. And so yeah, I'm proud of those achievements, and I'm proud of those moments, and I love sharing them to inspire people that sometimes you just got to be in the right place at the right time, having the right conversation.
It is inspiring, and I wonder just with the jump to IMG and the step to Auckland and events and arts, were you your DNA, were you a sports nerd or an arts nerd? How did that?
No, I was a sports nerd, and that was my problem at school. I think the teachers and principal at school saw me. I was kind of head of house, and I was, head of my sports team, captains, and I played a lot of netball at school, and I was in a running clubs, and look, I loved sport. I wouldn't say the arts was something that I was so naturally drawn to, but it was so much fun working on the arts side of IMG. It was just a 2-concert series, and my very first concert we had John Denver booked, and we were headed down to Hawke's Bay to get ready for the first planning visit. And not long after we landed, we got a phone call from John Denver's agent to say that he had been killed in an air accident.
Yeah.
And there we were. I was off for my first planning visit, and without an artist. So we then had to go back to the drawing board with Brian Galloway, this fantastic guy I was working with, who was head of arts and entertainment. And somehow we wrangled, and we got Julio Iglesias.
Wow.
Next thing, I was my first concert tour with them was jetting around New Zealand with Julio Iglesias and his team and his private jet.
Cameron, I'm not sure about you, but I for one, the Old School Tri Show, I never for a minute thought Julio Iglesias would feature in any conversation with anybody.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a very safe, thing to have thought, Brian. Definitely.
I'm just astounded that, of all the people, I was thinking to myself, who would it be? Who would it be? And it's Julio Iglesias. How cool is that? The man with the swagger and the charm and everything else, right? Yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
So with Ironman and obviously in '98 when you'd started there and you'd got your taste of it in Auckland there, the last one, the decision had been made that this is the last one. So your brief, I guess, was the blank canvas of largely, I guess the decision had been made that Taupo is the venue, the destination. Jane, go forth and make it roll.
Yeah. And along with, there is no way I would ever put myself in a position of saying, that I rolled that thing out. It was already really well thought through. And then you remember Keith Thorpe, who's an outstanding race director.
Yeah.
So, in those days, and to a certain extent, I think it still remains the same, is that, the race director is responsible for the delivery of the race and the event director was responsible for everything around it. And taking into that the race itself. So, Keith rolled out all of the detail around how that new course was going to be laid out, how the new how it would run. But we had to get all the new directors of each of the disciplines that you'll remember, and that was quite big. I remember that being quite big in itself because you'll remember that those roles are such privileged roles that when they get them, they don't want to let them go. And I can remember it was a really big thing of, do we take the Auckland experience with us or do we start afresh? And we kind of knew we had to start afresh because you had to, you owed it to the beautiful town to do that and its people. But that meant letting go of people who had been, run directors, bike directors, swim directors, transition directors, volunteer directors of Auckland and done a sterling job over a really long period of time. So, that was a bit scratchy. At the beginning, it was just a bit scratchy because you were bringing in new people and disappointing other people. But at the end of the day, we had to start afresh, and but we had all the experience in Keith and some of the team that he had been working with over many years.
Previous to you starting, Jane, was there any other thought around? Was Taupo was always the place it was going to go? Was it a pitch? How did that work? It was maybe slightly ahead of your time, but you were probably across it. Was there a pitch process for where it was going to go when it left Auckland?
I think there were other regions of New Zealand who put their hand up. You'll remember Rotorua were pretty keen at that time. And I think there was maybe Christchurch. I can't remember, one or two down south. But by the time I got involved, that decision pretty much was already made.
Yeah, and what a great decision.
Yeah. Were there any sort of issues or struggles with buy-in from the local community? It's a massive event to roll into a town the size of Taupo. What was that like with your engagements?
Oh, just fantastic from day one. There was when you bring something new like that, rather than any difficulties, I'd say there was a level of uncertainty. People didn't really know it or understand it or understood that when we closed a road for the bike that went past a petrol station, that really did mean that petrol station wasn't going to sell any petrol that day. All of those sorts of things were quite new to the town of just how big it was. But I only remember support, really, and that's possibly the way my brain works as well. You there will have been challenges with the community, not a doubt in my mind. But we were always able to work through those, and once you work through them, then you just tended to move on. But I remember being annihilated actually at a council meeting that I went to by some of the councillors who were not supportive of it because they felt that the money should be being spent in, roading and in other areas, or in the rural. Some of the rural sector weren't always so happy about that bike course that we had heading out to Reparoa there, and the impact on farming in the area. But on the whole, the great majority were really supportive of it. Then you get the thing underway and it starts to build. And
they understand. Yeah.
And just once they understood, then it became something that everybody just loved. And for those who didn't, probably left for the weekend because of the impact that it was so great. But yeah.
I got to say something that I really have always appreciated about the community in Taupo and the surrounding area is it's like, you turn up with an event and an idea and they're like, yep, cool.
Yep.
What are we doing? Okay, yep, no, great, love it. Let's do it, and the way in which they're able to band together to make it work. And I mean, it's been over 25 years down there now.
I know.
And for them to be able to just that continuous support, and every time you turn up there, they're always grateful to have the event. It's incredible to watch.
Yeah, and I can remember we used to have something like 10% of the population for volunteers.
Yeah.
So we needed. I just remember alongside my team just working really hard on the engagement with stakeholders and the engagement of that opportunity for everybody, the restaurants, the bars, the hotels, caterers, was really trying to share the benefits. And through that engagement, then so the support came. And I remember I used to speak at the volunteers function to say thank you. And I can remember the first or the second year asking people to put their hand up if they were going to return and volunteer next year. And everybody put their hand up. Nobody was not coming back the following year. And then people, had a great time and they'd tell their friends, I work on the transition, and you get to see all these fantastic physical bodies coming in after and tearing off. Remember, we used to have that wetsuit stripping. I think it was, that was a pretty high demand role.
I still talk about that now in the lead up to the race. I'd say if you're going to go commando under your wetsuit, please let the volunteer know they're giving their own time. All right, just tell them.
Exactly. So look, people became involved through volunteering, or they became involved through, supplying product to us that we needed. We tried as much as we could to use locals where we could. And in time, the spirit just built and built and built, and it very suddenly, very quickly became the home of. But there was that period of, I think, 14 years in Auckland, and it was 14 years of Auckland, and then a year in Taupo, and then 4 years, then 5 years, and then slowly it caught up, and then there was this kind of the change in the sport in that time was so great. It's just so great.
Yeah, well, we'll come to that. The other thing with Bayern, I guess, is too whare locally, and I think there was a wee bit of a speed bump there at one point. Where was it a new sort of area for you to sort of learn and wade your way through?
It really was, and good learning in that. And it was around the lake and the lake bed. But again, I can remember just sitting in a very long meeting around the table with them, and with the mayor and others that needed to be involved. And like all things, it's actually just about a conversation and a willingness on both sides to agree on how we would work together to maintain something that was going to work for all parties. So it was a speed wobble, but once we were there, again, once we got there, we all just, moved on in that relationship. And through, those beautiful warm welcomes we used to do in the morning with the waka coming up that, especially in the old days when it used to come up the river before we changed the course, we showcased this beautiful manaakitanga and this wonderful culture that New Zealand has through this event. 25 years ago, I mean, that's what you expect in an event now.
Yeah.
Didn't expect it then.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, Jane, when you were talking before with the phone call to Paul Gleeson and all the rest of it, and you think about with the people of Tūwharetoa and the locals in Taupo and just the people you wanted to talk to, nothing beats sitting down and having a conversation and sorting it out, right? And that's a key strength you have.
Yeah, it's something I use every week in my career. I think there's a whole lot of things that are so important when you're bringing together people, large groups of people, and one is knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know. I know what I know what I don't know, and I think for the things I don't know, I'm pretty good at making sure I go and ask people that do. And another is having a conversation and not hiding behind an email or not hiding behind. And sometimes that means they've got to be difficult conversations, but that doesn't mean to say that that's not a conversation that can't have an outcome and a really positive outcome for everyone who's sitting around the table. And I think that in some of those early changes, when we did move from Auckland, we had to have some of those conversations, and we had to have them with the head office of Ironman as well, because we were pretty sure about how we wanted to do things in New Zealand, and we loved the fact that I was thinking about this morning, our culture was very much, we really tried to think and present for the athlete, so we would try to just not quite see that cut-off time at the changeover from if someone had just missed the cut-off by 20 seconds, we'd just keep them on the way. Keith was so good at that. Just keep going, and I can remember over in Australia, they would be waiting at Foster Tongariro, they would be waiting for that cut-off, and bang, the first athlete that came, you were not going any further. It was a very rules-based, rules-driven. We very quickly, I feel, New Zealand got a reputation that we weren't like that actually this was and as a result, we used to position it as a really good first-timers race. We weren't.
It's really interesting, actually, Jane, just the New Zealand reputation, and I mean, there's several prongs to this question, but shifting from Auckland to a place like Taupo, it's not the most accessible place on the planet. The first time I went there in 2000, the thing that blew me away was what a massive international event it was. Effectively, half or slightly more competitors were from offshore. So, what's been the key to getting that international engagement? As I say, not the easiest venue, not as easy to get to as Auckland. You've got to go through Auckland and then go somewhere else. So how did you sort of build that, maintain it, and over the years to this very day, it's still a thing?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you talk about that, Brian, because we were very, very focused on that at the time, and that's when I remember we came up with that line, something, the world's best race and the world's most beautiful place. And I remember it really pissed the Australians off. It's like, what do you mean it's the world's best race? We believe it is. We really believe it is. So and one of the things we needed to be really careful of, and it's like with any sport, the culture, the brand of that sport is so much about its history. So we had to retain that 14 years of history from Auckland. So that's why Ironman New Zealand was good, because it was named by country and not by where we were. We had to make sure that we took all that, bottled all that great stuff that we created and that was created in Auckland, and then let's say, well, then how do we build on it from there? And I think we did it through we really focused on the fact that we were the first cab off the rank after Hawaii. We were the first Ironman in the world. And I remember being really competitive with Graham from Canada, because he said Penticton was first, but actually it wasn't a full Ironman. I say, but it wasn't a full Ironman, and I would fight for that little bit of history that said we were first, and because I felt that was a great selling message to the world, to come and do the original, because everyone else is copied or are building it off what we've done. So part was originality, part was you're gonna get to understand and learn a Kiwi way of doing things, and part was around the time of the year. It wasn't always great for the Northern Hemisphere, and it was certainly hard when it came to attracting pro athletes. But there was something in that. And then we had, a market sitting in Australia. And so I think it was a combination. And then we used to really work hard at the delivery of everything we did for the athlete. We had really good goodie bags in those days. It used to take us all day to pack them. They had so many things in it, and really good food at the dinners. Now, I know most people say, how good can pasta be? But I remember changing caterers just to try and improve the food experience, and the music, the commentators. I started in 99, was that first one as an event director, and I remember I was in Hawaii, and I was so blown away with what Mike Riley had done over there. I thought, we have to have him, because we're going to stay close to that race that we followed. And I remember he was sitting in a pub after.
Of course, he was.
After the race had finished in Hawaii, and I went up to him, and I didn't know him, introduced myself, and said, "You've got to come and call New Zealand, and can I email you about that or call you about that?" And he said, yeah, and I did, and he came in 2001, and so begun the beginning. So I feel like
you can't escape him.
Yeah, exactly. I want one of those shirts. So we were always trying to evolve the race. So which I actually think all major events have to do. Major events have to keep evolving, or they'll just get a bit stale. And then there's so many opportunities and so much competition, so many other things that people could do, that we just had to keep coming up with new and fresh ideas. And then the other part of it, probably just to finish on that question, was the pro field that we'd try to create, try to attract, because we knew if we had the pro field, then we got the media coverage. And in those days, it was World Triathlon Corporation, WTC, funded the NBC coverage, which meant we were, we had eyeballs through the world if we had that. But that part of that was about the pro race. So let's make sure we attract a great pro field so that we got that international media with it. But I can't remember which year, but there was a year when we tipped the balance for the first time, which was the year we were so excited because we had got the same number of domestics than international. Now that was, I think I did 17 years with Ironman. That was about halfway. It was a long time where it was predominantly an international race. Yeah.
With Mike Riley, as we all know, is a wonderful guy and a lifelong friend for all of us. What did you see in the US, in Hawaii, that you were like, that's it, he's got to come to New Zealand? Was it just the Mike-ness, as in, I'm trying to but he's just got that thing, that power, that welcoming, the way he just does it. Is it what it was? It was just his aura?
It was the aura of him. It was how he treated the athlete. It was the respect he had. People, were not wanting to finish the cross the line at any other time other than for him to call them. I
they were hanging out around the back, waiting for him to finish his toilet break or something.
I really realised how much the athlete wanted him.
Mm.
I knew that he was also a pulling power, that people, he would name his races for the year, and that would influence where people went. And he's just such a professional that I felt that we were bringing a piece of Ironman world champs to New Zealand by having him. And if you were to say to me, what are one of your 5-6 highlights or changes that you're involved in implementing, I would say bringing Mike to New Zealand was definitely one of them.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah. And he did say to me on a text today, he made a comment that yes, because I was checking with him what the year was that he came. I thought it was 2002, but it was 2001. And he gave me the dates, and his second text was yes, Ironman New Zealand remains my favourite location and favourite race anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Lovely.
He's done a lot of races, so that's something everyone should be proud of.
When you rolled out the first one in Taupo in 1999, I mean, race week for me is it's like Christmas week. Race day is Christmas Day. We're nerds. We just are. But was Christmas Day like your first one? You went out brand new town, and it rained. It bucketed down and stuff. What was that like?
I know. All I remember is just how wet it was. But I was just more excited by. Do you remember we had Tim DeBoom and Melissa Spooner?
Yeah. We've just spoken to Mel. Yeah.
Yeah, and they were just such fine athletes of that time. And so and the weather is something that, in all events, as my career's gone on, I've learned it's just the one thing you can't control, but there are just days, and that to have a fine Ironman day for me was always number one about the athlete, but number two, and not far behind it, was the supporters, because I know in an Ironman day is so good if the supporters are lining the streets, and there are just more of them there if it's not wet, and the volunteers and what they have to do in that sort of wet weather. But then with my marketing and PR background, I just wanted those pictures that were being beamed around the world to have some blue sky and not a whole lot of pouring rain, because I knew it was a selling point. I knew people would make that decision because it's just epic imagery of the lake and the bike ride, and I knew that we could sell this race on its imagery, but preferably not with all the rain that we got in 1999, the first year.
Was it? It was great. Obviously, having the next year, you had like Thomas Hellriegel, the world champion, and so on there. How important was it to have a Kiwi star? We hadn't, and the men would only had Scott Balance had won.
Right.
Aaron, I think, in the women's, Fiona McKee. We hadn't had a lot of domestic success in our own race. So the emergence of Joe Lawn, of Cameron Brown, how important was that for the event in those initial years, getting momentum in Taupo?
I think it was really important. I mean, we placed a lot of emphasis on the international pros because we didn't have that sort of strength at that stage in the domestic and our domestic professional field. But once that group started to really come into their own, then it made a difference because we had internationals that actually wanted to race against them. And I can remember New Zealanders asking me, probably a good part way through Cameron's dominance of the race, of the 12 years of winning, gosh, you don't really attract many pros anymore. And I was like, you don't have the strongest pro field anymore. I was like, yeah, we do. It's just they're domestic and you don't perceive it. Because we had for so long had those very strong internationals. But again, it was only one or two, mainly because the time of the year wasn't a good time of the year to attract the pros, European pros in particular, and secondly, we didn't really have the money, and we were needing to pay them. I mean, it was nothing compared to what they were getting in other other sports people would be getting, but we could only really afford one on each gender, and I was really would try to get a strong female and a strong male as well. It didn't always work that way, but so once you had Karen Balance, once Karen came
Yeah.
through, Joe Lawn, Lindley Allison, I mean, that was so good.
It's great racing. Yeah.
Oh,
And that was
phenomenal.
the thing. That was the thing, Jane. Is when you look at the quality of those fields, those domestic fields. Yeah, you mentioned Karen and Lindley taking on Joe, and Gina Ferguson was in there, and
Yep.
I mean, I'm going to forget a bunch of people, right? That were just incredibly good local athletes. And on the men's side, any race where Terenzo Bozzoni turns up, probably one of the greatest athletes the world will ever see, to try and take on Cam Brown. And you got Kieran Doe in there, and you got the Boasted brothers will be in there, and all these other people. It's incredible fields just of this domestic talent just want to turn up. They've all been training together over summer and bashing each other. Then they turn up on the racetrack to have a go at each other as well.
And have a go at each other. Yeah, no, it was so good, and that along with some really key sponsorships that we had around that time, that they helped us present the story to the average New Zealander that didn't really know what an Ironman was. Once you have en masse, and you've got the Lindley, the Karen, the Joe, Cameron, all of them, people started to talk about it more, and then they knew them for who they were, and the next thing they're up for Hellberg Awards, and so began the expansion of awareness of the sport, and then bring in a couple of great internationals like Thomas Hellriegel back then, or Peter Sandvanger, that great run that Cameron ran him down. And by 12 in a 12-minute, I think he ran him down, or something like figures like that. That then they just became fantastic stories. And I can remember we would get, and I'm sure they still do. I've seen it at some races since I've finished, but we were getting both TV networks down and from the finish line, reporting from the finish line. Michelle Pickles was a great supporter of ours over a long period of time.
It was always Michelle Pickles and Tony Street would turn up every
Street.
year, wasn't it? Yeah.
They became part of the fabric. The family, I used to talk a lot about the Ironman family. And people would say it was sort of an overused word, but I really felt that in New Zealand, you were part of a family. And that's why I stayed with it for so long. 17 years was a long...
Parallel with it, Jane, you a year or two down the line had the patter, a wee sort of side thing going on. You had women's duathlons going. So you really had... You were really totally immersed in the sport big time, and in the growth of the sport.
Yeah, well, and that really again came about by circumstances. IMG decided to close their office in New Zealand, and they asked me to move. They were pretty much moving everything to be run out of the Melbourne office, and they asked me to move to the Melbourne office, and I said that I didn't really want to. I really want to stay in New Zealand. So I decided to kind of go out on my own, and I went to see them and said, could I run Ironman for you, but from New Zealand? And they said, yeah, that's a good idea. So that's kind of how that started. I actually was running Ironman under the auspices of the Patter, but still reporting to IMG, and I think I did like maybe 2 years of that. And then the World Triathlon Corporation said to me, do you want to just take this on yourself and not do it through IMG? And I said, look, I'd love to, but I can't afford to. So we did it through, that's when we formed the business, and we did it through Taupo.
Yeah. As sort of things went on, it was funny just when I was trying to sort of look at going back through things and a wee bit like you, refamiliarising myself and so on. I stumbled across an article on the 25th anniversary of the race, and you're well into your career at that point, and you're talking at that point, one of the biggest challenges what you really wanted was a big pro field, and you wanted some coin, you wanted to find some more money to pay the pros. Is that one of the hardest things? Because you sort of alluded to it before. These these people work their butts off way more than so many sports people, and the return they get from their sport is they're not golfers, are they?
No. Oh, that was that was a real focus. I wanted to be, and I knew that if we paid them, I can remember having conversations with people that this isn't a check we're going to write for them just to race. This is I remember the first contract I did with Cameron. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me sharing this. That the agreement was about how he would support us to promote the race through the year. Him actually doing the race on the first Saturday in March was important, but it wasn't the whole payment, and that's why I was so focused on it, because in any sport, the cream rises to the top, and while it's rising to the top, those who are at the top have the opportunity to inspire, influence, make change, and bring in others. And the one thing that we didn't really have to do that was budget. And Ironman just didn't, all around the world, they didn't really pay a lot.
Yeah.
That was just what it was.
Yeah.
And there's something I was reminded of. I actually got a text from Mike Riley today, and he said, "Can you please ask Jane?" And it's a very good story. He goes, "Can you please ask Jane about her handing Cameron Brown her phone to ring Jenny when he got himself second place in Hawaii?"
It's so funny, because on my run this morning, I wrote down some highlights of my career, and there it is. It's on there. It's number 12, but not in any order. So I was there. One of the great privileges of the role that I had, I went to every Hawaii event while I was in the role. So I think I went to 15 or 16. And so this is 2001, was it? What was Cameron's year that he... Yeah, 2001.
First one, yeah.
And I'd been following him as best as I could on the race, as much as you can. And we could see what he was going to do. And then I managed to, through the accreditation that I had, I'm still quite new in Ironman. I've only been in the role sort of 2 years, so my accreditation got me so far, but I was standing behind these barriers and I was just yelling to Mike Riley that if Cameron holds his position, he was going to get second, and I had his wife on the phone. Yeah. And I had called her and said, because she wasn't there at that particular race.
Yeah, one of the boys, either Josh or Braden, were really little at that point.
That's it. Yeah, I can't remember which one.
Yeah.
And so I was yelling to Mike, I've got his wife, I've got his wife. And I was talking to her saying, just stay there. And of course, in those days, I mean, a toll call like that was really expensive. So finally, Cameron crashes across the line. And in fact, he just put the photo up prior to Hawaii last weekend when he on his Instagram page. There's a photo of him, and he's sitting on the ground and he's on the phone and he's talking to Mike Riley. And I always see that image that Cameron uses. I think that was my phone. And I got my ass kicked by Paul Gleason when I got back to work when the toll bill came in. Like $350 or something. It was a lot of money back then. But I was like, no, we had his wife. We got his wife in the moment, and they had a very funny conversation. It's worth hearing if you haven't heard it. They had a funny.
Brownie's told us before that he's asking yourself and Mike, how much did I win? Then he's trying to convert it to New Zealand dollars, and he's like, I won such and such, and he's like, oh, that's US, and suddenly there's all this yelling and yahooing that you've pretty much doubled it or even more so in those days.
Yeah.
Did Jenny sort of say, oh, really? That's a new kitchen, or something along those lines?
Something like that. And Mike was putting the microphone to the phone, so they weren't going to hear it. It was a great moment.
Well, $350 for the call, but I think there's a book. I've got it here on my shelf somewhere to my right. But Bob Babbitt did, I think, of the 25th anniversary of Kona, and that photo that you're talking about is actually in there. So
I've seen that photo used everywhere.
It's quite
an incredible photo.
Yeah. It was such a great moment. You're there and you're a New Zealander and you're just so proud. You knew what Cameron had done. And then, coming behind me, Thomas Hellriegel, I think it was Norman Stadler.
Yeah.
Tim de Boon had won it, didn't
He'd
he?
won it, yeah.
And coming behind him was those guys, Thomas, Norman, and Luther Leader was the other
Oh,
one.
yeah.
yeah.
It's not a bad
So
lineup, is it?
they, and what a group of athletes to be, Mark,
Yeah.
Amazing.
really coming
Amazing.
in second place with that.
As you got more experience in Ironman, how did it evolve over the first sort of couple of years? I mean, there's a certain amount of suck it and see as you into the new venue and just sort of getting a feel for it, and it's growing. What sort of things, what changes did you make in the first sort of 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, well, we made that change. We moved transition because that first early days transition used to be at the bottom of Spa Road there, and so we moved transition. But really, it was about growth. We just outgrew, and that's where Keith and then Keith had left, and Wayne Reardon and that team just come into their own. And Jeanette Blythe had joined me by that time, and she's super smart in what she does as well. And so the changes really came to where we had to hold things because we kept outgrowing sizes of marquees. That's when we moved the catering up to, well, the catering, the dinners moved up to the buildings up there after 2006. But the athlete, we just pretty much outgrew spaces, and that brought about change. And then Mike came and he had ideas, and one of the things I'd say as a team was that we were always open to some of the best ideas in the world are happening somewhere else. You don't have to be doing it first. It's just selecting the ones that you would do and really commit to.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I always thought, you mentioned a couple of people there in Wayne Reid and or Jeanette Douglas these days, didn't she? But two incredible operators. Wayne's still flying. He's found the fountain of youth in his garage somewhere, I think, that boy. And Jeanette, she's got her own events business these days. But they always strike me as people that seem to have time for those around them, time to recognise what's going on, and they seem to have like half a dozen arms and 3 heads to be able to do everything at once. So quite incredible people and a very, very good team over the years there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that those sort of 10 arms, sort of 20 legs and 3 heads is actually what event delivery is about. I think I always talk about trying to be a duck, you're sort of calm on the outside, but you're paddling away underneath. And all of those people that you've just spoken about are really good at that. They're really good when you're up against it for whatever reason. It might be, an accident that's happened on the course. It might be the weather. It might be an athlete who's just arrived from the US and none of their luggage has come with them. They've got no bike, no nothing to do an event they've been training for. So, but they're all. That's just how people managed it, and I really feel it was the culture of the way that we wanted to be as a group. We had really good fun. This was a very this was a fun part of my career. I loved my time running Ironman. That's why it was in my DNA, because of that family that the people that you worked with all year to deliver it, and then travelled with, and then had the reward to watch all that hard work. The joy that is at an Ironman finish line is some of the best in the world. I used to I remember when I sold Nike a sponsorship, I had taken Nike down to the finish line one year to just experience it. They weren't a sponsor at that time, but it's hard to explain what that is. You've got to have, you've actually got to experience it. So having those sorts of people involved meant that everyone worked together as a good old family, Ironman family unit.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
My Pollyanna view of the world and my love of the sport, the response and the way some people behaved in 2006, we got hit by the weather bomb, and adjustments were needed to be made and so on. it was a strange old day. What are your sort of memories and recollections of that day, Jane? It was pretty tough. It was brutal for you.
Yep, it was brutal. And I look back at that now, and you'd always look at and you'd do things differently. But one thing I know that we would never have done differently is the decisions that were made on that day.
Yeah.
How we communicated those decisions, we may have done differently if we had a different set of circumstances and we were in 2020s, not in the period that we were in. But while it was personally really tough because there was a very small group of people who were very loud about the decisions that were made, and I guess life is that people want to point the finger at someone, and if you're going to stand up on a bus and and give speeches and take the title, then you've got to be prepared that they're going to, when someone's looking for someone to blame, then you're probably going to be that person. I mean, 20 years on, I would manage that. I would be better about that if that happened to me right now. But I was quite early in my career still, and it was pretty painful.
Yeah.
But that said, I got tremendous support from the majority of the field who were there. I remember John Van Wees, still a very good friend of mine to this day, one of the best Ironman swimmers in the world. Him saying to me, put it, had his arm around me, he said, "Jane, there is no way I would have gotten that water." So, that's why I always stand that we made the right decision. It upset a lot of people, and having done an Ironman now, when I did that first one, I can remember thinking, I have a better sense of that disappointment now. That all it takes to train, and then to do it. But at the end of the day, it was a small number of people. But in the heat of it, in the weeks that followed, that small number of people felt like thousands. It was hard.
Because when we were pre-social media days, but Sports Hub then was very big. The website Sports Hub, and they had a forum, and people were just. It was the most feral stuff that we guys that work in radio and deal with talkback callers and horrible text machines and stuff. I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah, feral's the right word.
It was feral. It was feral. I remember the Ironman offered to pay to have security put on my house for a week.
Wow.
Because it was just the threats, but it was always behind. People use a pseudonym. On that Sports Hub, or I'd get or it was sent to the Ironman address. Very few people sort of said it to yourselves.
Stood up and were counted, But
I think the people that really supported me was I don't know if you remember Graham Fraser, who he had Ironman Canada Pentic. I mean, he owned Ironman races, and he was just a phenomenal deliverer of the sport. And he called me, and his wife sent me some flowers, and he called me probably once a fortnight for another 2 months because he'd been through it. And he said, "I just know it's brutal, but hang in there, and you'll come out of the other side of this." And I did, but I was a little scarred that year. I was scarred.
Yeah. And I think the thing is, Jane, going back to what we're talking about at the start, if someone wants to have we're all like this. If someone wants to come and have a conversation with you because they feel aggrieved about something, come and have a conversation. The door's always open. But don't stand outside and just chuck rocks from behind a pseudonym of some description. That doesn't solve anything.
No, it didn't. It didn't. So and the main thing is we took some really good lessons from what happened. And that's the part that that we evolved going forward, as you should. Even if you had to cancel a race and do everything again this year, I guarantee there'd still be 10 lessons that came out of what you were doing in 2024, like there were in 2006. And also, it was such an extraordinary change in the weather.
It was. Yeah.
All three of us were there. It was. I remember waking up in the morning, and Brian and I meeting out in the forecourt of the Suncourt Motel and just going, you cannot be serious. I mean, you could hear the wind in the night, you could see the whitecaps, and being a lake, that's all over the show. It was brutal. Remember there were kids surfing and body surfing on the lake that day.
Yeah, and I remember I went down to the water's edge with Ben Furtick, from CEO of WTC at that time. And we had arranged to meet down there at whatever time, 4 a.m. or something like that, to make a decision. Remembering that when I had spoken at the VIP function, which we used to have at the little yacht club that stuck out on the water, it was like a mill pond at 6 o'clock the night before when I was making the speech. And so it was hard to comprehend that actually this forecast that we were getting anyway, and it came late in the week, as you know, but anyway, that by the time we got down to the water's edge in the morning, I remember saying to him, this is going to be a big decision. And he said, no, it's not a big decision. The decision's been taken out of our hands. Just look at that.
Yeah.
And with that, we turned around and we walked away and we walked back up, and then we knew what we were dealing with. It was like, we don't even have to make a decision. This decision is made. People aren't going in there. So and then so began the beginning of the impact of that wind that was then out on the bike course and the volunteers that we had all over the course. So it was just and to this day, I hope I can say this without offending anyone, that unless you've competed in an Ironman, the average person has no idea the extent of the operational delivery of an Ironman event. You're dealing with 180 kilometres of bike course, which could be different to the run course. A massive body of water to deliver the swim, thousands of volunteers, just so much food. It's just so huge that to just suddenly change all that and run it the next day, or just suddenly move it by 2 days is not. I could understand why people would think that could be an option, but in reality, operationally, to do that was.
It's interesting. You just reminded me. I remember at the time someone saying to me, that someone I knew fairly well, why can't they just change it to like when the weather gets better? I was like, okay, well, how? Well, I don't know. They've got like these people.
Yeah.
I don't.
And complete disregard for people's travel arrangements as well. I remember those comments at the time. Some people are literally leaving on the Sunday, and
and all the coke that gets open days in advance to take the carbonation out of it. All the flat coke, just everything that had been done that was open, all the perishable food that was open, the 1,000 odd volunteers, like, are they available again 4 days later or when the sun comes out? So it's not, it wasn't.
Yeah, we're not talking a game of cricket here where you take the covers off and the pitch looks good, let's crack on.
Let's crack on. It was different. But if you've done a race, then you've gone around a course and you've seen everything, all those aid stations, all those people, everything that's ever. I think you've got a good appreciation for why it would be very difficult to just pick it up and put it over here.
Yeah.
Did the experience change you? Did you at any time think, oh, you know what, the Ironman, this isn't for me? We talked about the brutality of it before.
No, I've never felt Ironman wasn't for me. But that year, I was asked the year after that, I was asked at short notice to get involved in running the World Netball Champs 2007. We picked it up at very short notice because of the military coup in Fiji. And I found out in March. In fact, I had an interview for the job after the awards function, and pretty much got the job quite quickly. And then we were delivering the event at the end of that year. And I really stepped aside for the year. Jeanette, who had already been very much helping me deliver the event, she really stood into that event director role, did a cracking job, as she always did. And I never really went back into that role. And so the fact that move to do netball, which then led to the BMX World Champs, that led to others, it was quite interesting timing because I was pretty scarred that year, and I think I just needed a year away from it. But I wasn't away from it. But I was removed from it a little bit from the way that I had. And then you can't say to someone, "Oh, look, I'm just going to stand down for a year and could you take my job for a year, but when I'm finished, I'm going to come back and can you not?" And she'd done such a great job that was when she, stepped more into the event director role, and I had another role, but without a title, really.
Yeah.
And,
But how good that, the world works, the universe works in mysterious ways, that those opportunities, you just needed a refresh to just take your mind, step slightly aside and recharge. It's probably not the word I'm looking for, but the timing was cool, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I still went on to do another 9 years.
Yeah.
In 2015, after the 2016, was it? And so that was 2006. So I still did another 9 or 10 years and loved it. I mean, I would never stay in a role. That's one of the things I've always felt, that in my career, that I would never stay in a role that I didn't enjoy, because we spend so much of our life at work, and if we're not happy at work, then we're not happy in ourselves. And so I loved it, and I bounced back from that year. But you're right, it was just very well timed as I look back and reflect that I had to get heavily involved in netball very quickly to run that World Cup in the very short space of time that we had. And that was probably the breathing space that I needed. And then when I came back to it, my role was slightly different, and I just continued to love it. Yeah.
Christchurch people loved you because, we had a bit of a tough old time in 2010, 2011 and so on, and there were people with their bikes trapped in buildings and things like that, and it was only like a couple of weeks before Ironman, and you really made it happen for, a lot of people in this part of the world.
Yeah, I did. I remember that. Yeah, we raised that money, and we raised some money to support, to get the athletes there, and I remember speaking to hoteliers, trying to get them to give us some free accommodation that we could pass on to those athletes. But that's that. I come back to that. That's what that family feel was. When those athletes were hurting, we were all hurting.
Yeah.
We were all hurting. I remember this.
I remember it. It must have been at the welcome function that Mike and I were hosting, and those athletes that were affected. It was either the welcome function or the awards function. I think it was the welcome function. We got all the Christchurch athletes that were there up onto the stage.
Yeah.
And I tell you, the applause and the aroha and the love for these people from the Ironman family was just quite incredible. As these poor buggers, their cities in ruins, they don't know what the hell's going on at home, but you know what? They got a bike, they got a wetsuit, they're ready to do an Ironman, and they're going to get through come hell or high water.
That's incredible. Right. It was a great indication of how close that wider family of athletes are.
So, because we're talking here about Jane, the event manager, Jane, the sports administrator, all of these things, but those great words, you are an Ironman. You got to the start line. You didn't just get to the start line, you got to the finish line, and you went to Kona. When did you make that? Did you always want to, had it always sort of been in your mind, or did you think, like, this is a great event, but they are all batshit crazy? At what point did you sort of think, I've got to do it myself?
Well, it was, it's funny, in the way that Mike had said to you to get you to tell the story of the phone with, I'm sure if you spoke to Greg Welch, he'd say, get her to tell you the story of Hawaii, because we were, I'd done 10 years running Ironman, and I think I was in the 11th year, and we were at a function. There was Greg Welch, Ben Furtick, Diana from Hawaii. She had come out. Paula Newby-Fraser was there. There was about 8 of us having a drink. Something came up about me having never done an Ironman. I scoffed, laughed, said, won't do it, can't do it, never do it, can't swim. Love my job, and that's where I'll leave it. And then about a week later, this invitation arrived on my desk, and it was an invitation to celebrate my 10 years of running Ironman New Zealand and the contribution I'd made to the sport outside of it, because I was on a committee for Hawaii as well. I was, and I was one of the only, Diana and I were the only females in those days when we would go to these meetings of sort of 15 male event directors and Diana and myself to do it. And I called Greg Welch and I said to him, look, I've got this invite. And he said, are you going to do it? And I said, no, not a chance. I said, no, not a chance. I can't swim. And he said, well, it's a bit like, a golfer getting offered the opportunity to play in the US Open and not doing it. I think you've got to do it. And I think if you don't do it, you're going to regret it. So I'm going to give you a call tomorrow to check in on you. And I want to hear that you're going to do it. So sure enough, he called me the next day and I said, yeah. So I called, I was really worried about the not being able to swim. So I called Mark Bone.
Yep.
And I said to who I knew, obviously through the sport, and I told him. And I said, could you have a look at my swimming? Because I can't swim. And that, I've got to give them the decision for the place. And he said, sure, come in. And I, train the pros at like 6 or something. Come in at 7. I said, no, could we meet at like 5? I don't want anyone to see me. I don't want to be even near with those pros. So,
I don't think Mark Bone sleeps anyway, so it works out all right.
So we got in there. I hope he remembers that into this. So we got in, and I got in at one end, and he said, okay, just do one length and I'll meet you at the other end. And I said, okay, and I thrashed my way down to the other end, put my goggles up, looked at him, and he said, Jesus, you're right, you can't swim. He said, it's going to be a hell of a task, but I reckon we could get you there. And I said, okay. And that was enough. And so I got into it. And I actually went in, because I was working for myself at the Patter at that point, I did my last block of training, went to John Auckland, who I had such admiration for and still do, just a fantastic guy, had brought so many. He was another person who helped us grow that race, by the way. And spoke to him, and he was so excited by it. He was like, you've got to do this. This will be great for your learning for the race and everything. So he got me into a program, and I did the last 6 weeks up in, I lived in Kona, and I did, I think, the last month of my training up there and had a blast. Yeah, had a great time.
Did you do Kona before New Zealand or?
Yeah, I did Kona in 2009.
Yeah.
Right.
And John trained me for that. Terenzo was doing really well, and I thought it was hilarious that I was trained by the same person as Terenzo, but with a very different result. It was just a great day. It was a really, really hard day, and people have often said to me, "Oh, you had quite a good run." And for me, it was an okay run, but I always tell the story that I had about 10 Ks to go in the run, and a lady came up beside me on my shoulder, and she said, "Oh, aren't you the race director for New Zealand?" And I said, "Oh yeah." And she started giving me some ideas about things we could do better and change, a bit barking at me. So I kind of sped up as much as you can speed up at that point in a race in Hawaii, and she just kept catching me. But I would say that last 10 Ks was, I thank her, because she got me to the finish line. So I didn't want to hear her banter anymore. But it was a great day, a great occasion. I had some family come up and support, and it just made me realise. I always knew how great Hawaii was, but just such a special place, such a hard race. It was a hell of a day, but I still enjoyed it.
But I guess before we start letting you get back to the rest of your day, Jane, it's a great conversation. You said before that Cameron Brown's phone call is number 12 on your highlights list, and I'm interested to know what some of these other highlights are. I mean, I know with respect to Cam, you said it was no particular order. We'll make him believe that.
We take it as a given that being, on the old school try show is probably on the list there as well.
Yeah. What are some of the other highlights that have jumped to mind in the last little while?
So I thought about these on my run this morning, came home and wrote them down. So this is no particular order. I'll race through them because we've actually talked about them. So we've talked about the move to Taupo, the quality of the fields that we were able to attract with what we had, some of the characters of that race, the Mike Ramsey, Tony Jackson, what a two amazing people, Liz and Jerry Rangers, who flew from Hawaii every year to volunteer for us. JJ, who had that wonderful pub that we all drunk at and told stories at. So the characters, I think the cystic fibrosis piece, that partnership was epic.
Tracy Richardson, that was the lady, wasn't it? Tracy was incredibly inspirational lady.
Yeah, and the whole partnership, it was the way they brought that partnership to life. They just did that so well. Remember the year they put all the signs all the way out on the course that no one had done that.
And as an aside, because you remember Aaron Fleming was always one of the young people that came to the race as a child, as one of the poster children of look what you can achieve even though you may be have cystic fibrosis. He's still racing now. He still puts himself out there. He is living his best life and was recognised in the New Year's Honours list as well. Aaron was incredible.
In fact, and our recognition was on the same day. He was. They only do 12 people at a time, and he and I were in the same. So I had a lovely catch up with him. So there was that. I put Mike Riley, the volunteers, because the volunteers there are just so phenomenal. They're so much fun, and the way they get dressed up. I put the John and Judy Collins visit. I mean, that was amazing, and John doing the race as well. What an endorsement! I thought that was fantastic. And then Cameron with my phones on there, and then I put. We had some great sponsors like that. That sponsorship with Nike was pivotal. It really changed stuff because suddenly we had a really cool kit to give away. The finisher shirt was a quality shirt. Nike took such pride in the relationship that they had with the sport, so that was great. The breweries in New Zealand. We had some really good partners who really believed in it. So there you go. That was a run through. Through my list, and then and I also just quickly put the three things that I got so much out of for me personally, like what were my highlights, and it was the people I met and the friends I made. Still great friends today. It was awesome to catch up with you guys. I stay in touch with so many Ironman people. In fact, when Florida, Tampa experienced those tornado and hurricane that just 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, I got in touch with Ben Furtick because I know he lives in Tampa Bay, and we had a great quick conversation on the phone. So amazing friendships.
How did he fare, by the way?
Is he okay?
His house is okay. Almost pretty much lost his beach house. He had a lovely little cottage on the beach, which I'd been to. The friends that I made and are still great friends today. The places that it took me to, I went to some beautiful Ironman destinations around the world, which I treasure and will always treasure. And then doing my own Ironman, twice, and what it taught me, and what I got out of that personally. More than just the work side of it. It was great from a work point of view, and it was great from a health point of view, but I learned a lot about myself through doing the training and getting to the finish line.
2 quick questions before we let you go. Lining up and doing your second one in New Zealand on the race that you've invested so much of your life in. How cool was that? What was that day like?
Yeah, that was amazing. I loved that day. I knew it was my last. I'd already announced I was leaving. So there's a lot of emotion in it. John Auckland trained me again, and he said, when we train for this race, we're not training for time. We're training for fun. I want you to go out and just enjoy that. Enjoy the course. The volunteers out on the course. The people, and just celebrate the role that you've played. I'm just one of many people, but just celebrate that role, and that is what it felt like. And both my parents were elderly at the time. They came down for it, and all the staff that I'd worked with and close to were all there, and it was a very, very special day, and a worse time than Hawaii 5 years earlier. But all athletes always going to talk about their time at one point.
Exactly. Before we let you go, Jane, life post Ironman, you've achieved some massive things with FIFA delivering a World Cup in this part of the world, and which remarkable work and building on just the years of experience that you've had. What's life like for Jane Patterson these days? What are you up to?
Oh, well, I've really enjoyed a year of a bit more balance this year. I've sort of had a bit of a year off. It was a gift I gave to myself after finishing 4 very, very challenging years delivering the FIFA tournament. Loved it. It was, wouldn't have it any other way. It was very, very hard job, and I felt I would take a good break after that, which I've done. But I had 3 or 4 years in the UK prior to that, working for UK Sport on their sharp end of, the Olympic and Paralympic program in the United Kingdom, which was an amazing experience. And they have budgets with a few more zeros than we have in New Zealand, so that was really good to get that on my CV. And now, just enjoying the break, and I'll get back into some work next year, and I'm not 100% sure what that is right now, but I'm just trusting at this point in my career that the right thing at the right time, and I'm really going to look forward to it.
Well, we're just sort of hoping that you'll come and visit us in Taupo for Ironman, because you've used the word family a whole lot, and you're a key member of the family. You'll always be a part of the Ironman family, and we're incredibly grateful for the time that you've given us, Cameron and I, on this edition of the Old School Tri Show.
Great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I feel quite privileged to be on this show, and great to see you both again. And thank you for just a great day of memory. I've just thought a lot about Ironman today in preparation for tonight, and I didn't need reminding. I've always known it's a sport that was in my DNA, and it remains so. And have really enjoyed chatting about it.